What's up, everybody? This is Mr. Conway. We're going to start on Unit 7, which is Cognition, and we're going to be focused today on Unit 7A, which is Memory. Let's go ahead and get started with our objectives from the AP College Board. We are going to talk about different cognitive processes, describe different psychological and physiological systems of memory, short-term memory, procedural, principles that underlie effective encoding, storage, and construction of memories, and strategies for memory improvement. Let's go ahead. I want to review something from your hand mnemonic device that we created at the beginning of the year in those 8 concept cards, and that is just the field of cognitive psychology. I want you to write this down. These questions like to pop up on the AP test. It could be behaviorism, it could be cognitive, it could be biopsychosocial, it could be any of those approaches. So since we're dealing with cognition, let's make sure we know what cognitive psychology is: the scientific study of all the mental activities associated with thinking, knowing, remembering, and communicating. For example, you might see a question that says, what would a cognitive psychologist most likely be concerned with? And then it'll give you choices. Usually you're going to find the answer that deals with some sort of thinking, that deals with mental processes, remembering, okay? And then the cognitive approach to psychology is how we encode, which is like when information comes in, okay, when the outside stimuli comes into our memory. It's called encoding. And we process the information, we store it, and then we store it later so we can retrieve it. Okay, so let's start off with our first memory that we're going to look at, and that is sensory memory. Okay, your sensory memory is kind of the first thing that that the outside stimuli comes into contact with. It's the first stop for external events. So it's a split-second holding tank for incoming sensory information. This could be while you're walking down the hallway. Think about all the things that are going on: sounds, sights, smells, feelings, right? You might get brushed by somebody might hit you kind of hard. So think about the things that you forget immediately. Think about the things that stay with you, all right? Everything gets processed into this sensory memory, but most things, if you can look at this 3-box or information processing model, all the incoming information that hits your sensory memory, a lot of it just drops off and is forgotten, okay? If you think about your day yesterday, think about every time you were in the hallway. You probably don't remember every person that you saw or every little thing that was said, but it did go into your sensory memory for a little bit, okay? Now, there is going to be, most of the information's not encoded, which it's not taken to a higher memory bank, okay? Only some of it's encoded. Now, we'll talk about what happens when we get to short-term memory here in a second. So with the sensory memory, we're going to have 2 types of momentary memory. Iconic memory, which deals with a momentary sensory memory of something visual or visual stimuli, and then echoic memory, a momentary sensory memory of auditory stimuli. So imagine you're walking down the hallway, you see all those things, that's going to be iconic memory. And then echoic is going to be anything that you might hear walking down the hallway. So my question to you, why don't we remember everything that passes through our sensory memory? And the answer goes all the way back to Unit 4, and that is selective attention. We only process the things that we're paying attention to. So our selective attention, we're probably not focused on, this book gives an example about how your feet feel right now in your socks. You feel this now because the sensory messages from your feet are encoded from sensory memory into short-term memory. Okay? Now, why'd you not feel your feet before? Because the messages entered sensory memory, but were not encoded because you were not selectively thinking about them. So once we go from sensory memory, then it jumps to short-term and then long-term memory. So what are the duration and capacity of short-term and long-term memory? Okay, short-term memory, another word for it is working memory. Memories we're currently working with and are aware of in our consciousness. This man, George Miller, remember his name, came up with a series of experiments that were called the magical number 7, plus or minus 2. He believed that if we don't do anything with our short-term memories, with the information in them, it'll usually fade in 10 to 30 seconds. And our capacity in short-term memory is limited, on average, to around 7 items, plus or minus 2. So we have to use mnemonic devices in order to try to remember things that are more than 7. If you think about it, you might be able to remember, without the area code, a phone number. Know how many digits are in a phone number? You guessed it, 7. All right. Now, we use these mnemonic devices. We use them all year. They are simply memory aids. And the two that we're going to look at, and there are several more in your book, the two we're going to focus on right now are chunking and rehearsing. Chunking is a process where you group items together, but try not to make more than 7 groups. It gets a little hard to juggle if you do that. So, for example, I might be able to memorize 15 numbers by grouping them together. For example, instead of saying 4681, I might say 4681. That's kind of a way to chunk the numbers by 2s so that I can perhaps remember more. Another way is by rehearsing, doing something over and over and over again. We've talked about this with your Cornell notes. All right, the more times you put some repetition, the more times you see something, the greater chance that it will jump from short-term memory to long-term memory. Now, long-term is our permanent storage for memories. Okay, it's not like a computer or a phone or a Xbox or PlayStation where you run out of storage and it says, sorry, erase some, make room for some new ones. Okay, it's basically unlimited. But memories can decay or fade away from our long-term memory. And we're going to look at long-term memory in 3 different formats. So this is going to be the first one. Episodic memory. Memories of a specific event stores in the sequential series. Memories of specific events. Should not be an A there. Stored, wow, lots of typos on this one, in a sequential series of events. So this is you just simply remembering something that happened. You remember the last time you went on a date. You remember the last time you went to a football game. You remember the last time you went to work. Okay? The episodic memory. The next one is going to be semantic memory. General knowledge of the world, stored facts, meanings, or categories, rather than sequentially. For example, what is the difference between effect and affect? With the semantic memory, they've done studies and there's no signs of decline due to old age. So if you test somebody's semantic memory for somebody that's 60 and somebody that's 30, you'll find that the semantic memory, the age doesn't have, there's not really any effect on it. And the last one we're going to look at is procedural memory. Memories of skills and how to perform them. These memories are sequential but might be very complicated to describe in words. For example, trying to teach someone how to tie a certain kind of knot. If you've ever had to tie a tie or if you've ever had to get help, I almost guarantee it that the person has tied the tie on themselves and then given it to you, because it's really hard to just tell somebody how to do it. Riding a bike is considered procedural memory. How to throw a curveball, anything that is some sort of task or skill, okay, that has to be done in like a certain order. That's going to be your procedural memory. 2 types of memories with long-term memory. We're going to call them declarative and non-declarative. You might see your book call them explicit and implicit, but I know that the AP test refers to them as declarative and non-declarative. So declarative memories are conscious memories of facts or events that we actively tried to remember. So when you're studying this chapter right now, you're trying to form declarative or explicit memories about the memory theories and how it works. All right, school is basically one big process of trying to remember things. So that is going to be declarative memories. Okay, you have to try to remember them. Non-declarative memories or implicit memories are unintentional memories that we might not even realize we have. Okay, this could be something like brushing your teeth, combing your hair, right? Cooking something that's really automatic. The example this book gives, while you're helping your friend clean their house, you might find that you have implicit or non-declarative memories about how to scrub a floor properly after watching your parents do it for so many years. So anything that you don't have to think about is a non-declarative memory. Now we're going to look at a different level or a different processing model, and this is called the levels of processing model. Now this basically breaks it down into why it's basically two categories. This is why we remember, why we can remember some things, and then why we don't remember other things. So it breaks it down into two, which is things that are deeply processed or elaboratively, which is not recognized as a word. Deeply processed is when you study the context and research, you research the facts and the reason behind it. You will have deeply processed it, and you'll likely recall it later when you're looking up the facts behind something. Then the other one is shallowly or maintenance process. This is going to be cramming for a test, or if you don't study, if you just read the last little bit, you keep it around, but then you're just going to forget it. So you repeat it over several times, and then you write it on the test so you don't forget it. Well, you're going to forget that pretty quickly. And when it comes time to take the midterm or the final, it's not going to be there as if you elaboratively or deeply processed it. So we're going to try to deeply process our AP Psychology this unit. Okay, long-term potentiation. This goes back to biology. This deals with neurons in the synapse. And what long-term potentiation is an increase in a synapse's firing potential. So think about neurons and firing after a brief rapid stimulation. So this is believed to be a neural basis for learning in memory. Okay, so if you have an increase in the synapse, you're going to increase the likelihood that you'll remember something. Drugs that block long-term potentiation interfere with learning. Mutant mice engineered to lack an enzyme needed for long-term potentiation, they can't learn their way out of a maze. Rats given a drug that enhances long-term potentiation will learn a maze with half the usual number of mistakes. And injecting rats with a chemical that blocks the preservation of long-term potentiation erases recent learning. So they found that it is crucial to learning, especially also recent learning new things. And then the last thing we're going to look at is what teachers try to tell you all the time is make it relevant to yourself. You're more likely to remember it if you can make it relevant to yourself. Information deemed relevant to me is processed more deeply and remains more accessible. Okay, so try to make that connection. Okay, it does take some effort. But if you can make it relevant, then you're more likely to deeply process it and have all that stuff hopefully go to your long-term memory where you'll still have to revisit it. But that's it for today. Next class, we're going to be talking about retrieval and forgetting before we move on to 7B, which is problem solving, thinking, creativity, and language. So lots of good stuff. All right. I'll see you guys in class later.